Okay, welcome back. So today we're going through May-June 2023, question paper 13. Okay, so we'll start from the bottom. So question 30, just get the pen up here. Which approach would a government be most likely to use to eliminate deflation? Okay, so remember, if we're trying to eliminate deflation, then that tells us that it is probably what we refer to as bad deflation. Okay, bad deflation is that one where we have the aggregate demand has significantly reduced, and that has resulted in a decrease in our real GDP. Okay, so just to show you what it would look like here, I'm just going to do it on an SRAS instead. Okay, it could be drawn on LRAS too, just be aware. Well, just to show it quickly, okay, so we'd have our price level here and we'd have our level of output here. In order to have this bad deflation, we must have had a decrease in aggregate demand, which leaves a decrease in the price level, hence why it is deflation, but it also leaves us with a decrease in our real GDP or our output. Okay, so first thing we need to ask ourselves is, how do we fix that? Okay, so it's very simple. Anytime we have inflation that's caused by AD moving to the right, we try and fix it by using a policy that will move AD back to the left. So anytime we have a policy here where we have AD moving to the left, we try and fix it through a policy that is going to move AD back to the right. Okay, so we're going to be looking for expansionary monetary or expansionary fiscal policies. Okay, so let's go through these. If we have an increase in direct taxes, okay, what's that going to do? We know about our fiscal policy. Taxes go up. That is a contractionary fiscal policy. So that is going to move AD further to the left, which will not help us in fixing this deflation. Increase in interest rates. That is a contractionary monetary policy. Okay, so once again, that type of policy is going to result in AD going left, which is not going to help us fix our deflation. Okay, so we're left between C and D, right? Now, it says which approach would be most likely. So the reduction in indirect taxes, what we need to consider is, what is that going to do? So a reduction in indirect taxes is going to increase the spending, right? Because it's going to make the taxes on goods and services cheaper, which means that more people will be able to buy them. However, indirect taxes are generally imposed on a good or a service, right? So it's unlikely that we're going to have indirect taxes affecting the whole economy. Hence the reason why we're looking for fiscal or monetary, because we know we're looking at a macro concept with AD and AS, right? So if we reduce the budget surplus, what is that going to do? A budget surplus means that our government revenue exceeds our government expenditure. So in order to reduce the surplus, what we must be doing is we must be increasing government expenditure and decreasing government revenue. Okay, now how do we do that? We use an expansionary fiscal policy in order to do that, okay, which is the opposite of what we have in A. It is where our taxes go down and our government spending goes up. Okay, so D is going to be the correct answer here, because that will directly address AD. We can't say for certain that a reduction in indirect taxes will specifically affect AD. Okay, it might result in a minimal change depending on how many goods and services have those taxes imposed on them. So 29, it's actually a very straightforward question. Diagram shows that the imposition of a tariff raises a product's world price from $10 to $14. By how much did domestic producers' income increase as a result of the tariff? So what we need to do is we need to find their income prior to the imposition of the tariff, and then we need to find it after the imposition of the tariff. So before the tariff, the price in the market was $10. Now, if we look at this, we have a gap here, or we have a shortage that's existing because our demand is much higher than our supply, right? So what's going to happen in this case? Normally, to calculate, when we're in equilibrium, for example, we calculate it based on the amount that's demanded, right? And then how that interacts with the price. But if we have a shortage, this does not mean that 100 million are being sold. It means that 100 million are wanted. So what we're going to sell is the 20 million that we're supplying to the market. So therefore, the income before the imposition of the tax would be 200, and the imposition after the tax, because we still have a shortage here that exists, so demand is still exceeding our supply, meaning that we're going to sell all of this supply, will be 30 multiplied by 14, which should give you 420. And then all we have to do is take away the tax after the imposition of the tariff from the income, that we were earning before the imposition of the tariff. And we'll see that we're going to be left with C. Okay, 28. Diagram shows AD and aggregate supply in the short run and the long run. Which row is correct in causing a shift in the SRAS and the LRAS? Okay, so let's look at these one by one. So A, change in AD from W to Y. Okay, now that's not true, right? Because AD has only changed from W to Y because of the shift in SRAS. So we must have had something that will allow us to increase our supply in the short term, whether that is a decrease in the cost of production, whatever it happens to be, right? We've got all those reasons listed in the slides and the revision notes on the OneDrive. So we're left with three options here: increase in availability of labour, decrease in wage rates, and decrease in raw material costs. Now, if we were to say which one of those is most likely to be in the short run, it would probably be the raw material costs, right? But what we're going to do is we're just going to keep them here just in case. So if we get to a stage where we're a little bit unsure about what's happening in the first, go to the second one, right? And it will make it much more obvious as to which one is the correct answer. So for example, if we have a decrease in immigration, there's no way that that's going to shift the long run aggregate supply, is it? Because we'll have less workers available, so we've got a reduction in our quantity and quality of resources. Okay, now an increase in labour productivity, okay, quite possibly, but remember that what happens is the increase in availability of labour for the SRAS here, that kind of thing is likely to be a long-term consequence, right? So it's not something that we can change very quickly unless we get more detail, like they have relaxed immigration rules, etc. Whereas improvements in the education of workers, what is that going to do? That is going to increase the quantity and quality of resources. So we will have the shift in L or AS in the long term. Okay, question 27. A country has a current account surplus of 141 billion. Which policy may its government implement to reduce this surplus in the short run? Okay, so if we think about it very simply again, right, what we're talking about here is we're talking about exports and imports, right? Current account surplus does consist of other elements like the primary income account and the secondary income account. However, we just simplify it for these answers by thinking about exports and imports. So if we have a surplus, then we must have exports higher and imports lower. Okay, now if we're trying to reduce the surplus, which is what we've been told, then we're trying to make the opposite effect. We're trying to make exports lower and imports higher. But we're also told that we want this effect to take place in the short run. So out of all these options, there may be more than one that will allow us to do this, but which one is going to be done the quickest? Okay, so if we look at our options here, we'll look at B and C first, right? So an increase of import duties, that is not going to make our imports higher, is it? That's going to actually reduce our imports, which will not help us to reduce the surplus. It will actually increase the surplus. A decrease in regulations to encourage more foreign firms to locate in the country. What's that going to do? Over the long term, that is going to increase our exports as the foreign firm comes into the country, sets up their operations, becomes more efficient than firms we have in our own country, and starts to export their goods and services from our country. Okay, so those two will be the opposite effects, and we're left with a decrease in direct taxes and an increase in interest rates. Okay, so both of these will allow us to reduce the surplus, but the increase in interest rates is more likely to be a long run effect. Okay, so to explain what happens with an increase in interest rates, when we increase the interest rates over the long run or over a significant period of time, we're going to have an appreciation in the currency. So an appreciation in the currency is going to reduce the price of imports, which makes our total imports higher, and it's going to increase the price of exports, which makes our total exports lower. But it does take time to affect. Okay, so it does take time for the appreciation to happen, and also for consumers' spending patterns to change based on that. Right, there'll be a bit of a time lag between the price of the imports coming down and then consumers recognizing that change in the prices and actually changing their patterns of behavior to import more. Okay, whereas if we have a decrease in direct taxes, that puts more money in people's pockets right now, and generally what we know, the rule of thumb is, the more money they have in their pockets, the more imports they're going to consume. Because we have a greater variety of choice with our imports, right? So when we get more money available to us, more disposable income, we're going to be using that to import more goods and services to increase our standard of living. 26. Okay, we're shown a change here. We said what would cause the change. So what we see is we've had AD moving to the left. Okay, which one would cause the change? So again, what we're looking for here is, what are our components of AD? C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Okay, consumer expenditure, investment, government spending, and net exports. Okay, and we're looking for any one of these which is decreased. So if we increase the money supply, that moves AD to the right because it is an expansionary monetary policy. Okay, and it will actually increase C and I. Increase in government spending, we can see here from our components, AD will go to the right. Okay, a decrease in labor productivity, that's not going to affect our components of AD here, is it? That might affect, in the long term, it might affect our ability to be able to make goods and services, right? So it may affect our output in some way, but the one that is directly linked to the components of AD is the decrease in exports, because if our X comes down and our M stays the same, we will have a reduction in AD, which will be represented by a movement to the left. Okay, what is the most likely cause of an outward shift of a country's AD curve? So again, what we're looking for is we're looking for C, I, G, or X minus M, and which one of these is going to be the most likely cause of that increasing. Okay, so a decrease in the competitiveness of domestically produced products. What is that going to do? That is going to make us import more, right? Because if we can't buy them on the domestic market, or they're now less competitive, we may be able to import them for a cheaper price, or maybe they're better quality, so we're going to increase our level of imports. What is an increase in the level of our imports going to do? That is going to move AD to the left, not to the right, which is what we've said, right? An outward shift is a shift to the right. Decrease in the general price level, that will be deflation. And we've already shown that deflation is where AD moves to the left, right? At least bad deflation is. Good deflation is where AS moves right. Decrease in the money supply, that is a contractionary monetary policy, and it is designed to move AD to the left. But then finally, a depreciation of the currency's exchange rate. When we have a depreciation, our total exports will go up and our total imports will go down. So AD will move to the right. Depreciation results in the price of our exports being cheaper. So assuming they have there's an elastic demand for exports, the total export revenue would rise and price of imports go up. So assuming they're elastic as well, the total price of imports, total expenditure on imports would come down. Okay, which government action is least likely to prevent a fall in economic growth? Okay, so if we have additional controls on commercial banks lending, relaxation of rules for immigration of adult population, removal of trade barriers, training of education. Okay, so we're going to say which one is most likely not to stop a fall in economic growth. Okay, if we relax the rules for immigration of the adult population, that is likely to stop the fall in economic growth because we'll be able to get more workers into the country. If we remove trade barriers on import of raw materials, that is likely to stop the fall in economic growth because we will be able to import more raw materials, which will improve the quality that we can offer both domestically and through our exports. And obviously, if we train and we educate our workforce, people become more skilled, they become more competitive internationally when it comes to jobs too, which means that is likely to stop the fall in economic growth. However, if we put more controls on commercial banks lending, that is the one that's least likely to stop the fall in economic growth because it would be designed to move AD to the left, right? Which would reduce our level of output. And why is that? It makes it harder for people to borrow money, which reduces their access to that money. Okay? When we put more controls, we're essentially saying that's an increase in credit regulations. It's a contractionary monetary policy. It makes it more difficult for people to borrow. 23. Now these questions are pretty simple once you get used to the format. We've gone through them in class and you can check my videos over them in 2024 papers. Generally given to us the same like this, where they're saying that they're using half their resources before specialization. So what we have to do is we have to calculate which country has the comparative advantage, and then we've got to calculate the total level of output. Okay, so if we just go through these first. The opportunity cost of country Y producing 2 shoes is 4 shirts. Okay, no, we can see the opportunity cost of producing 2 shoes is 8 shirts, so that's wrong. Country X producing 1 t-shirt is 4 shoes. Okay, no, we can see that's wrong too. So if we calculate our opportunity cost, right, we'll just put it over here. So for country X, their opportunity cost of making a shoe is going to be 3 t-shirts. Okay, their opportunity cost of making a t-shirt is going to be 1/3 of a shoe. Okay, so for country Y, their opportunity cost of making a shoe is 4 t-shirts, and their opportunity cost of making a t-shirt is going to be 1/4 of a shoe. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to focus on the one that has the lower opportunity cost, and then they'll specialize. So in this case we can see that for shoes, country X has the lowest opportunity cost, but when it comes to making t-shirts, country Y has the lower opportunity cost. So they're only giving up 1/4 of a shoe, whereas country X is giving up 1/3. Okay, so once we do that, all we have to do is find out that we're using 50% of our resources before, which is what we're told above in the question, right? So therefore our output is going to double. If country X is going to focus on shoes, we're not going to be producing 4,000 shoes. They're going to focus all their resources, so they're going to be able to make 8,000 shoes. Okay, country Y we said is focusing on t-shirts, so instead of making 8,000 t-shirts, they are going to make 16,000 t-shirts. Okay, and then all we have to do is add them up. There'd be now no shoes made in country Y and no t-shirts made in country X, and there would be 8 plus 16, 24,000 made in total. Table shows relative price of exports compared with imports. So what is this? This is essentially our terms of trade, right? Showing our price of exports in relative terms to our imports. So what we can see is that the price of exports is going down here, right? Relative to the price of imports. So if we go through these here, this is a very easy question. Export prices have increased, that's wrong. Export prices go down when the terms of trade go down. General level of prices has fallen, that's also wrong. It's nothing to do about the general level of prices, it's to do with the average price, the index of exports and imports. Terms of trade have deteriorated, that is correct, because when we go down, the terms of trade gets worse, and the higher the number gets, then the higher the relative price of exports compared to imports, which is where we say that we have a terms of trade increase. And the volume of imports increasingly exceeds the volume of exports. Terms of trade doesn't tell us that. Like I said, it just tells us the relative price levels of the two. 21, very common question again. Okay, so table gives details of national income statistics. We are asked to calculate NNI. Okay, so what is NNI? NNI is GNI plus depreciation. Okay, or in fact minus depreciation, because we have to take away the depreciation of the fixed capital assets. So if we take consumption, investment, government expenditure and net exports, that figure is going to give us GDP, right? Now, all these terms are outlined and the calculations are all shown in the economic growth chapter, so you can go to that chapter if you want, right? But just to explain how we get to each figure. So when we add the net foreign factor income, it's going to help us to calculate our GNI. And then to get from GNI to NNI, we just take away our depreciation. So if we add 2,000 500, 600, minus 100, 25313,000 is our GDP figure. Okay, minus 200 leaves us at 2,800 for net foreign factor income. But remember, with NNI we have to take away the depreciation, so we have to minus 100, which leaves us at 2,700 for our net national income. Okay, and 20 is also relatively simple. So we're given a real GDP and a nominal GDP. It's from the same chapter, in fact. What we have to do is we have to convert our nominal GDP to real GDP. Okay, and how do we do that? Very simply. We just account for inflation with it. So if you take, to do a simple calculation, 575.5 million, and then where is it here? Right. We take this 5% price change, right? So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to divide it, not hashtag, divide by 1.05, which is representing 105%, right? And we're going to be left with 550 billion. Okay, very straightforward. Okay, now if you look in your chapter, it'll go through nominal GDP and price index in base year, price index in current year, etc. You can go through those calculations too. I'm just showing you the easiest way to do it here, right? Which policy is most likely to help correct an adverse balance on the current account balance of payments? Okay, so tricky question. They're trying to trick you out with the English vocabulary here. An adverse balance is a bad thing, right? So an adverse balance is going to mean that our imports are higher and our exports are lower. So we want to basically do the opposite effect of that, right? We want to make these exports not lower, but we want to make them, or find a way to make them higher, and we want to find a way, if possible, to make these imports lower so that we can correct this balance that's existing. Okay, so which policy is most likely to help? There may be more than one. If we reduce the level of direct taxes, we've talked about that before, that would actually increase the level of imports, right? So if we reduce the indirect taxes, what's going to happen there? We're going to focus, or that will mainly be focused on the domestic economy, right? It's not going to be focused on imports or exports, because indirect taxes will be imposed on goods and services that are being sold domestically. If we get rid of tariffs completely, that is going to also increase our imports, which is not what we want to do. That would not correct an adverse balance, but it would contribute to it getting higher. But if we depreciate the currency, like we talked about before in this same paper, exports up, imports down, due to the changes in price. Okay, so same way that we did question 20, we're going to do this question here, right? So what we've got to figure out is we've basically, again, got to figure out like our real GDP for each figure. So in which year did it decline? So for 2011, if we take 220 divided by 1.09, that is going to give us a figure of 201.83. Okay, for the second year, 240 divided by 1.25 will get 192. Okay, so without even calculating it, we can see that it declined in 2012. Okay, now if you calculate it for 2013 and 2014, what you should get is another rise up to approximately 201, and then in 2014 another rise again up to approximately 207. Okay. So a Bangladeshi citizen is employed as a construction worker in Qatar. He sends some of his wages back to family in Bangladesh. How will this be recorded? Okay, so first thing is, it's not going to be recorded on the financial account. That's a separate part. Okay, the current account balance of payments consists of primary income, secondary income, balance of trade in goods, and balance of trade in services. Sending money from your wages is not a balance of trade and service. There's no service provided, right? What it is, very simply, it's a part of net primary income. An area of net primary income that's mentioned is the compensation of employees, right? Compensation of employees plus net property income from abroad. That's including rent, interest, dividends, etc. Right? Now, included in this compensation of employees is the money that somebody working in another country would send back to their family. The secondary income consists of mainly international aid and gift payments that are made. Okay, it does consist of some other components as well, but as a majority, the questions they ask, it would be those two. Government has an aim of reducing income inequality, considers 3 policies. Which combination of policies would be most effective? Okay, if we increase the marginal rate of tax, will that be effective at reducing income equality? Yes, it will. Okay, why? Because it's making our tax system more progressive. An increase in the minimum wage, absolutely. To reduce income inequality, we want to give low income earners more of a share, basically. Oh, so we can see here we're left with only one option already. But a subsidy on battery powered cars which cost over $40,000, no. Okay, now why not? So just to explain this point, because $40,000 is a lot of money for a car. If we're subsidizing cars which low income earners will not be able to purchase anyway, then it's not going to help us reduce income inequality. Okay, diagram shows the impact of a government imposing a unit tax on a demerit good. S is the supply curve and S1 is the curve after tax. What is the after-tax revenue of the firm? Okay, so remember that the total burden of the tax that's imposed is this area in here, right? Which is the area from the new price to where we hit the original supply, and then that area itself is split between the burden that is placed on the consumer and the burden that is placed on the producer. So the consumer, their burden is the difference between the price that they pay now and the price that they were paying previously, and the producer is the area of the tax that's left over, basically. Okay? So, therefore, if this is our area of the tax burden, all we need to do is we need to calculate how much were we selling and making before in revenue, which would be 30, because that was our equilibrium before, multiplied by 10, right, which would be 300 before, and now we're selling 400 by 5, sorry, 40 by 5, which is total revenue of 200, but minus the tax, which is that area that we've shaded. So that would be 20 multiplied by 5. So our tax would be 100. 200 minus 100. They're left with an after-tax revenue from the indirect tax placed on the demerit good of 100. Okay, question 14 I'm not going to spend any time on. There's a video uploaded on the OneDrive specifically for this question, okay? So go look on that in this same folder. Okay, 13. Product X has a PES of +2 while product Y has a PES of +0.2. Which statements about product X and product Y is correct? X is more substitutes. Not relevant. Substitutes is relative to PED. Determines whether they're elastic or not. Okay? It has absolutely no impact on a firm's ability to supply their own good and service. A 20% price fall would lead to a greater decrease in production of Y than of X. So let's see. X is plus 2. So if the price goes down by 20%, the quantity supplied will go down by 40% for X. But it would only go down by 4% for Y. So we can see that that's wrong. After a price rise, it is more difficult to increase Y's output than X's. Yes, that's true. Because their PES is less, say for example the price increases by 10%, their output will only increase by 2%, but product X will have an increase in output of 20%. And therefore D is going to be wrong too. Okay, diagram shows 4 supply curves. What statement about these curves is correct? Okay, so just to label them. W has an elasticity of 0 that will rise as price falls. Okay, that's wrong. It will have a PES value of 0 because it is perfectly inelastic, but that value doesn't change, right? So as price goes up, it still has a PES value of 0 when it's perfectly inelastic. X has elasticity greater than 1 that will be constant as price rises. So we can also see that that's wrong. Right? What we can see is that X is relatively inelastic because of the shape. It's closer to vertical than it is to horizontal, right? So it's going to be relatively inelastic. As the price goes up, the elasticity is not going to get greater. Z has elasticity of 0 that is constant. Okay, Z has elasticity that is infinity because it is perfectly inelastic. Perfectly elastic, sorry. Perfectly vertical. Okay, so we say it's infinity and we draw that little sign that I can never draw correctly. Looks something like that. So the correct answer, Y has elasticity greater than 1 that will fall as the price rises. Okay, so yeah, as we're here, our quantity is going to be more responsive because we're dealing with a smaller number, right? So that means that with the shape of the curve, which we can see that it's relatively elastic, because we're closer to horizontal than we are to vertical, right? But as we get up here, the quantity starts to be dealing with a bigger number. So we are going to become slightly more inelastic as the price continues to rise, right? Because we're going to be changing our quantity as a percentage will become harder when our quantity before the change is going to be such a high number. Whereas here, our quantity before the change in price will be a small number, so any change will represent a greater percentage of quantity supplied as a change. Okay, question 11. The table shows an individual's weekly consumption of biscuits and coffee varies with income. What statement about the income elasticity of demand over the range of income is shown to be correct? So first of all, let's calculate the YED values here. So the income change is going to be from 100 to 150, which is going to be 50%. Okay, for biscuits, for the 500% change, haven't we? We've gone from none to 5 biscuits that are being sold. Where for coffee, we have had a 100% change, right? So change in quantity demanded over change in income. What are we going to see? We're going to see that For biscuits, it's greater than 1. 500 over 50, that's 10. That is definitely greater than 1, so that's correct. For biscuits, it's 0. No. For coffee, it is less than 1. Coffee is 100% over 50%, which would be 2.0, so it is not less than 1. And for coffee, it is unitary. We've just shown that it's 2.0, it's not 1.00, which is what unitary is. Okay, when the price of a firm's product falls by 5%, its total revenue also falls by 5%. What describes the product's PED? So the PED here will have to be 0. It's going to have to be perfectly inelastic, right? Because the change in price must have resulted in absolutely no change in the quantity demanded down here for the total revenue to fall by the exact same percentage as the change in price. Okay, so for all the others, for unitary, there'd be no effect on revenue. If it was infinite, the price wouldn't be able to change in the first place because we'd be perfectly elastic. And if it was elastic, price down would mean that revenue goes up. Question 9, not going to spend too long on this either. Definition of joint supply, you just have to learn. It is in your interaction of demand and supply chapter, unit 2, second last chapter, the one just before consumer surplus and producer surplus. Joint supply is where a good is a byproduct of the production process of another good. What would not cause a shift in the demand curve for a good? Change in the price of a complement, that would. Change in the price of a substitute, that would. Change in consumer incomes, that would. But a change in the price of a product itself would not cause a shift. It would cause either an extension or a contraction. Okay, question 7. A free market is in disequilibrium with a shortage of a product. As the market moves towards equilibrium, what will happen to the price, the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied? So, if you're confused about this, just draw it, right? We're told we're in disequilibrium with a shortage. So we know that a shortage is excess demand, right? Always draw your diagram where possible. So this is where we are now, so we can see what's going to happen. We can see that the quantity supplied is going to have to increase to get back into equilibrium. The quantity demanded is going to have to decrease to get back into equilibrium, and the price of the product is going to have to increase to get back into equilibrium. Okay, so we will be left with C here. Question 6. What is most likely to cause a shift in the supply curve for rice? Okay, so change in the price of rice, that will cause the extension or the contraction that we've discussed already for the demand question as well. I think it was question 8. Change in the price of meat, change in the size of the rice industry, or a change in taste and preferences. Okay, so change in taste and preferences for rice will be something that will affect demand. A change in the size of the rice industry is something that will affect the supply. Change in the price of meat, it's not really going to have any effect on the change for rice. It's not really a substitute for rice, is it? Maybe it could be deemed to be a complement, I suppose. And if it was a complement, it would only affect demand anyway. But the size and the nature of the industry is one of the factors that shift the supply curve. Okay. Again, we just need to learn those. When is the price elasticity of demand for a product most likely to be price elastic? Okay, so it's definitely not if there are few substitutes available. That is likely to make it inelastic. It is definitely not if it is a necessity product that is likely to make it inelastic, less responsive to changes in price, right? Measured in the short run, that has nothing to do with it. But if a large percentage of income is spent on the product, then it will make it elastic. Why? If you're spending a large percentage of your income on a product, you're going to be very sensitive to any price changes that take place with that product. So which economic conditions are likely to encourage an increase in enterprise? We're going to want the interest rates to be low, aren't we? Because for enterprise to happen, we'll need and we will want people to be able to borrow easily. We're also going to want the profit tax to be low. Because again, to encourage them, they're going to be incentivized by the profits that they can make. So the more profits they can make and keep, the more incentivization of enterprise happens. We will want consumer confidence to be high because we're going to want to generate demand for the product, right? And we're going to want unemployment to be low so that we can attract workers to the job, and so that we can also have we can know that workers are skilled, etc., and the economy is performing well. So unemployment gives an indication of the state of the economy. So low, low, high, low. If we match those up, we're left with C. Question 3 is very simple. We have two types of PPC. Whoa. Draw that again. We have two types of PPC. We have a straight line PPC and we have a curved PPC. So what's the difference? Curved PPC shows increasing opportunity costs. Straight line PPC shows constant opportunity costs. Okay, if we know that, we can find the correct answer straight away. We've got a straight line, so we know that it's increasing. We don't study any diminishing returns to scale in AS economics. We don't study anything about infinite returns to scale. We do study increasing, but we know that it's curved, but we can see that this one is constant. Okay, very easy question. A government decides that all non-essential businesses must close for 3 months due to a disease pandemic. What is the opportunity cost of this policy? So what are we giving up? We're giving up the non-essential businesses, right? So therefore, it's nothing to do with the leisure time. That is not what we have given up as part of this, right? That is a benefit for the employees, not an opportunity cost. So we're left with lives that are saved, the production of goods by essential businesses, or the loss of goods from the closed businesses. So it's not going to be the production of goods. Whoa. My pen always goes mad after about 50 minutes of recording. It's not going to be the production of goods by essential businesses, because we're told that it's only non-essential businesses that are closing, right? And it's not going to be the lives that are saved due to reduced disease levels, because again, that is not an opportunity cost. It's not a negative consequence of the decision that we've made. It's a positive consequence of the decision that we've made. But what we will lose for certain is the goods that we would have made from these non-essential businesses that are now closed. Okay, and final question. So I won't spend too long on this one either. People plant flowers in a local park. Which statement is correct? So the statement that is correct is, well, first of all, they're not a public good if they're individual, not identical in nature. That has nothing to do with it. Public good is just if they're non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Okay. So flowers are not a public good if local people can limit the number of visitors to the park. That is the correct one, because then if they're able to limit the number of people coming into the park, then that does make it excludable. Okay, which will make it a private good in that case. Okay, thanks for listening.